Honored speakers, ladies and gentlemen, fellows and students of Tembusu, good evening and a very warm welcome to the 35th Tembusu Forum. Because of the challenges that the COVID situation had presented us, it is the first time we cannot meet face to face in our multipurpose hall. Looking on the positive side of things, moving the forum online has also allowed us to reach more people, with a record of 380 attendees attending tonight, of which 124 are our beloved alumni. This record attendance is also a testament to how close to heart today's topic is to the young adults amongst us tonight. I believe many who are present have voted for the first time in the recent general elections, making it extra special and meaningful. There were many firsts for this election. Most notably, probably, is the absence of physical rallies. This made the online sphere an important battleground for votes. In the lead up to and during the campaigning period, I witnessed active and rigorous engagement on the different social media platforms. It was heartening to see such active political participation online, especially among the younger generation, speaking well of a new generation of voters who care deeply about the nation's future. There were some really insightful political commentaries and strong rebuttals from the participants. But at the same time, I found it hard to follow some of the threads because a lot of the comments were polarized, emotional, and sometimes toxic. The electorate has clearly expressed in the election the desire for more diverse voices, checks, and balances in our political system. Even as our political system matures, I hope as a society, we also grow to embrace differences and strengthen our ability to disagree respectfully and constructively in our debates. I look forward to an engaging evening of discussion with everyone. Thank you.
Now, may I call on Prof. Ko to say a few words and also introduce the speakers. Prof. Ko, please.
Thank you, Margaret. I want to extend a warm welcome to the freshmen who will be attending the first Tembusu Forum this evening. Twice per semester, I organize and chair a Tembusu Forum. And for this semester, this is the first forum. And the next forum in October will be a mock debate between the two candidates for the US presidency and vice presidency and their two opponents. So this evening, we want to dig deeper into the 2020 general election. We know the facts, but we want to dig deeper to understand the implications of the fact. For example, many people say this is a watershed election. So my question to the experts, is this true? They said that of the 2011 election also, but in 2015, the trends were reversed. So the question is, are the results of the 2020 election a paradigm that will be sustained in the future? To put it another way, is the Workers' Party here to stay? And is expectation that the Workers' Party will become stronger and stronger with each general election? It has been said that this is the first internet election. So my question to the expert is, did all the parties use the internet well? And if not, who did the best and who didn't do so well? It has also been said that in this election, there's a new demography that made a decisive impact on the outcome, and these are the young voters. So my question is, how important were the young voters in this election? And did they, for example, have an impact in the outcome of the election in Sengkang GRC? One more question I want to ask is that in past election surveys conducted by IPS, the result was actually quite counterintuitive. We found that in general, the heartlanders voted for PAP, and the better educated, the wealthier people living in private housing voted for the opposition. So my question to Gillian is, did this happen again this year? And then I want to ask a question about the tactics used by the different political parties. What were the tactics that worked and what were the tactics that didn't work? So these are some of the questions that have been in my mind. And I've chosen 3 very good panelists to help us understand these trends and lessons learned. I wanted the first speaker to be a woman and to be someone with a proven scholarship on Singapore politics and Singapore elections. And I couldn't have picked a better person than Dr. Gillian Koh, the Deputy Director for Research of the Institute of Policy Studies. She's led the post-election surveys for IPS in previous elections. Gillian is a very good friend of mine, and I still remember when she came back from England with a PhD, she applied for a job with IPS. And after interviewing her, I told her that IPS is a very small think tank and didn't have a career path. So I asked her, why did you apply to NUS to teach in the political science department? And Gillian said, no, I want to work for IPS. So I offered her the job and she's been with IPS ever since. So may I call on Gillian to speak first? Gillian, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Rector of Tembusu College and my mentor, Professor Tomiko. Good evening also to the Master of Tembusu College and all the Tembusu College family. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on GE 2020. I note, of course, long list of important questions to ask, and I'll try to address some of them. But I have to say, unfortunately, our IPS survey for 2020 is not ready yet. But you're right to recall, Prof. Goh, that in the past IPS post-election surveys, there's a very, very clear trend that the higher the socio-economic class of the respondent to our surveys, the more likely he or she is going to support the idea of political pluralism in Singapore, which we read as a proxy for support for the opposition movement as at least either a check and balance on the PAP government or a route to greater diversity of voices in Parliament. And in the case of the 2015 election survey, while we know that there was a bounce back to the PAP in terms of the election result, we found that even those we called conservative voters who would support the status quo, they responded to our survey to indicate that they would nonetheless want far more checks and balances in Parliament and diversity of views. So even among the conservative voters who would be of the lower SES classes were supportive of greater voice and greater diversity. So with those opening remarks, let me quickly go through what I would like to say in response to Prof. Koh's questions this evening. First, while my survey results are not ready, I will tap on black box researchers' election data in order to respond to some key questions. First, about the swing in votes and what really fed into that. And I'd like to end that first section on how, therefore, the results might shape the political transition that Singapore is in, or rather the PAP government is trying to effect from this 2020 onwards. We know that the Prime Minister says he will hand over to his successor sometime during this term, and his successor also has a core of leaders around him. So how is that going to shape up? How is it determined by the results? The second section will deal with the question of tactics, and that also responds to Prof. Koh's question about the use of tactics and how were they effective. I'll take a stab at the question of whether this was an internet election and which party used the potential of online interactive media best. Finally, I will talk about the broader implications for democracy based on what took place in GE 2020, the hustings, and also the process as well as the results. But these are, I feel, will be deeper issues that we deal with as an academic community, well beyond the actual results of 2020. So with that, let me quickly go to the first section. First, why was it that many of us thought that GE 2020 was a snapshot for the PAP? Let me quote my dear colleague Lovia Singh, who said, "It is without a doubt that GE 2020 will be a landslide victory for the PAP. In fact, the opposition may be entirely annihilated with this election. Singaporean voters will run back to Papa." Why? Because I think in the past, when the election was held on the back of a crisis of some sort, in 2011, it was the dot-com crisis and the security crisis of 9/11. You saw the PAP win with a swing of 10.3%. Then in 2015, while the results are confounded to some extent by the reminiscing that took place because of the passing of the founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, I think there was also the effect of the haze, and the PAP did campaign on the effect of the haze as well as what it meant for foreign relations. And with that, you saw a swing of 9.8% to the PAP. Black box polling data also suggested to people like myself, as we were looking at the GE, suggested that people were satisfied with government performance, although there were marginal decreases in satisfaction from May to June to July 2020 in the areas of wages and cost of living. And this is an outcome of the crisis that we face, clearly, from COVID. And it still is a balance between trying to save lives or livelihoods. And I think it's a difficult balance to maintain. The effect, of course, of COVID has been to jobs and wages and cost of living issues. I think the final point that then threw the spanner in the works, us analysts, would be that, as it turned out, through the quad.sg poll, there was actually a high level of late deciders going into the election. This poll was taken in April 2020 among 700 people, not a very large sample. It was weighted for age, race, and gender. But among the 700, 53% said that they had not decided who to vote for. And this was a bit different from 2015 when they did this question, about 46% who said that they were undecided. So there was actually going to the election, while us analysts felt that it might be an instinct of Singaporeans to choose the party that they know, to really be a firm and steady hand to guide Singapore through the crisis. There's another set of data that suggested that people were suspending their judgment to look at what the parties were going to offer, what promises they were going to make, what policy platforms they were going to present, and finally, who exactly were the opposition parties going to field, as well as the PAP, who they were going to field in the local arena. So the black box data, and a shout out to David Black, who's offered to lend me this information. As I said, in May 2020, and you can see that there are various items to assessing the government satisfaction index, which is collected through every month. The overall figure is 86%. And then when you get to June, 85, and when you get to July, 82. Just very small changes, but look at the figures for jobs and unemployment. You see a fall of about 6% month on month in terms of support for the government. Look at the points about population management that had surfaced. and government accountability. This was taken just after the GE, but you can see that there's been a shift in sentiment on government accountability by 6 percentage points. So it's a generally high government satisfaction data from May to June, but over the hustings, there's a change in assessment and a change in assessment specifically in government accountability, population management, jobs and employment. So this is where you see the issues that were shaping the vote as we went into 10th of July. So pull it together, I think there was a bunch of late deciders, and then we will look at the role of social media and how the parties got the message out. I think we'll also now delve deeper into the message of an opposition wipeout. Remember, I cited Belvia. And so the question is, how did the opposition parties then respond to that prospect? The WP actually saying that they weren't going to deny the PAP mandate. They actually said what they were trying to deny is an opposition wipeout and to secure a situation where the people of Singapore would not give the PAP a blank check. This is these are the figures for the point about there being many late deciders. So in a poll taken between 1st to 4th April by quad.sg, you can see that 33% had decided to vote PAP in this poll. And then you can see that 14% had already decided they were voting for the opposition. But a huge ground to play, 53% saying that they had yet to decide. So what were the issues? In the black box survey that was taken with 1,500 people and with quota controls for age, gender, and socioeconomic class, the top issues were cost of living and jobs and employment. But you can see that they did ask questions about COVID, the management of COVID, and 13% listed that as among one of the top 2 issues that was going to shape their vote in the, but it was not right top of mind. You can see that there was also the question, the option of GST, and 8% had cited GST as among one of the top 2 issues. So to the question of demographics, Prof. Koh, you had asked to what extent the younger voters mattered. Then there is in the black box survey findings quite an interesting chart about how different demographic groups have different considerations going into the GE. The boomers were far more concerned, the older the seniors, 60 and so, were more concerned about the cost of living issues. But you will see that, of course, with the Gen Zs, they were concerned about even getting into the door in terms of jobs. In between, there is quite a lot of difference in terms of sentiment on different issues. And again, within the black box survey, for those who voted opposition, you'll see that the issue of government accountability was top of mind, far more salient, I would say, than for those who voted the PAP, for whom the state of economy mattered and who is best to lead the country mattered. Now, on social media, who was relying on social media more, you'll see that it's clearly the Gen Zs tuning into social media. So what was being put out through social media and the parties that were engaging on social media really would have greater sway over the mindshare of the younger voters. And what then were the key stories that mattered? In a question, what have been the biggest stories of the general election for you personally? Then in this poll that was taken in July, early July, you'll see that the withdrawal of candidacy of Ivan Lim mattered, which would, I guess, be a negative for the PAP. ECN Young supporting the PSP would be a positive for PSP. And certainly James Lim's performance, James Lim being at that time candidate of Sengkang GRC and now the MP in Sengkang GRC. So with that, I hope I've given you a feel of what swayed the vote share. And let me come to the final point of this first section, and really about how the 4G leaders stacked up. In the GRCs that were held by the 4G leaders, I thought I would record the margin of victory that was secured. And in terms of how they stacked up, you'll see that Ong Ye Kung had the largest margin of victory, riding, of course, on the hard work of Koh Poon Wan in Sembawang GRC for many years. Masagos Zulkifli was next, and I think that he didn't do it on his own. We know that Heng Swee Keat had just moved out of Tampines and contested the East Coast. So, in effect, Heng Swee Keat was contesting two GRCs. Masagos Zulkifli leading Tampines ostensibly, listed as second. Vivian Balakrishnan considers himself part of the 4G leadership because he's of the same age as Heng Swee Keat. Next, then Josephine Teo, Jalan Besar, who had just gone there to helmet with 30.7 as margin of victory. Then Lawrence Wong, Chan Chin Sing in Tanjong Pagar, Tan Chuan Jin in Marine Parade, and a very close call in West Coast GRC for S. Iswaran, where the PSP, the newcomer, contested, led by Tan Chun Bong. So I think looking at it, what do we have to say about succession? With COVID and GE2020 and the political currents across the globe, I think the PM had already said in the Fullerton rally that he will not be, he will be staying put at the helm to lead Singapore safely out of the COVID crisis. So with that, and I think with the results of 2020, the pace of transition will be far more measured than would have expected going into 2020. I think that clearly there will be a large measure of policy reform with economy and social support taking first priority. And you will see that the HSK formula, which is nothing new, but there will be an reinforcement of that effort, an engagement of the ground through the Emerging Stronger Together exercise to listen afresh to the ground given the outcome. And I think that you have heard already with the opening of Parliament and the addenda to the President's speech in the last 2 days, that has said that there will be a level of agnosticism to listen afresh to the various policy options that the opposition as well as the grassroots leaders and citizens will offer. And therefore, this is the opportunity for various stakeholders across Singapore and citizens to present their alternative views, because I think the leaders of the PAP government are ready to think. If we want to talk about East Coast GRC, then I can come back to this point later. So now let me quickly move to the second section of this presentation on the tactics. Okay. I think the first one is, if you recall, one key motif of GE 2020 was that there might be an opposition wipeout because of a flight to safety. The WP was very effective in responding to that, and I think that there was a national, clearly on a national platform on TV that James Lim said. The PAP has argued that this election is really about giving them the mandate to bring the country out of this crisis. The truth is the PAP in all likelihood will have this mandate by the end of this election. And what we are trying to deny the PAP isn't a mandate. What we are trying to deny them is a blank check. And that is what I think this election truly is about, so that we can actually have these debates. I think that it was a very nuanced position, and it struck just the right balance for voters, that they would have a PAP government to guide them through the crisis, but with the opposition, they're denying them a blank check, and therefore creating a new balance in Parliament, which, in response to Prof. Koh's question, is indeed a significant outcome, that we have WP make a breakthrough in a second GRC, 10 duly elected WP opposition, and I think sealed and confirmed with the PAP conferring to Pritam Singh the position of Leader of the House. So this is not now going to be a position where the opposition is an inconvenience and a black mark to be scrubbed out, but to be acknowledged and systematically recognized and given, in fact, the role to present alternative policies. So it's a recognition of a system that is now put in place, where the opposition is part and parcel of our democratic landscape. The second one, in terms of tactics, is what was attempted by the opposition. I think it's often said through the past general elections that the opposition is highly fragmented as a field of many parties, and it's difficult for voters to get their minds around who are the parties, who are the people, and what they stand for. So prior to the election, there were very many efforts to create coalitions. The first one being led by Tan Teng Bok just before he launched his new party, Progress Singapore Party. He said that he would try to pull together Sing First, Democratic Progressive Party, People's Power Party, Reform Party, Singapore Democratic Party, the National Solidarity Party, and People's Voice, a total of 7 parties around together so that they can form a coalition and become a clear, sort of have that kind of clear brand in order to be a credible and massive, in a way, force, an umbrella party in order to counter the PAP. But that did not come to pass, and in the event, Tan Teng Bok set up his own party, PSP, and said that he would be happy to work in a loose coalition with other parties. The second attempt was then for the Sing First, DPP, PPP, and RP to try and move to some kind of coalition with the Singapore Democratic Alliance. That attempt was rebuffed by SDA when it said that there were certain rules that it had to stick to, which meant that there needed to be a membership of that period of time in order to take in new members and field them in any election. So that put paid to the idea that there would be a coalition. The final point here is that given that those actual attempts for formal coalition did not work, then there was sort of bilateral negotiations in order to avoid three-cornered fights. What we saw was the RP ceding way to the PSP, which is quite a major move because the RP had contested in West Coast, but it ceded way to Tan Teng Bok in order to contest there. Kenneth Jayaratnam said, "We recognize Dr. Tan has a tough fight on his hands, despite it being his old stomping ground there in West Coast, but we do not wish to hinder his progress." So you see some level of cooperation, but on the other hand, there was a dispute that arose after that between RP and PSP over Yio Chu Kang, and we see that in the end, in the event, PSP contested in Yio Chu Kang, and so RP must have conceded contesting there. The final point is this, to Prof. Koh's question of this being the first internet election because of COVID. I think that the parties did try their best to use online media, social media to push out their messages. But what you saw with WP and PAP were the candidates speaking to each other. And I think that what was really cutting edge was the PSP making a real attempt at optimizing the use of interactive media, taking questions from the public and then responding there in real time. I think that is probably best practice, and we'll see how the parties learn and try and use interactive media more effectively going forward. So let me end with 3 key points about the future and what this GE2020 means beyond the actual results. First, in the run-up to GE 2020, I think that, of course, there was a lot of debate about whether GE should be held during the COVID period and pandemic. There, you heard Dr. Tan Cheng Bock say that holding an election at this point in time in the midst of the pandemic would be a threat to public health. He said that there were 3 options for the election. The day of the publishing of the election boundaries. Said that first.
Gillian, sorry to interrupt. I think
Yeah.
we need to round up already.
Okay, the election should be called after the crisis is over, or call the election at the end of the term, or form a caretaker government. And this was actually outside the constitution. I don't know whether people followed that, but for those who followed it, I think that that would be a trend that is probably somewhat disturbing. Of course, this was responded to in Parliament by Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean, that these suggestions were outside the Constitution. And I think as a long-term significance would be the issue of constitutionalism and the rule of law. And we've got to think carefully about what impact it does have in terms of shaping public opinion. The second is really about information. And I think that the quality of our democracy will depend on there being high quality information that's shared during the election. And I think we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm referring here to the debates on the 10 million population.
Hi, Kevin. You're over time. We can just give you a few more seconds to wrap up, and then we have to keep
finally,
going.
what's the role of contestation? I think we always ask the question of whether there are too many parties. And I think I'd end on this, that maybe there are not too many parties. There should be as many parties as possible. Michelle Lee, who contested in Jurong GRC, the most popular, led by the most popular politician in Singapore, she said this election is not about winning or losing, it's about standing up to be counted, and it's about the voices of the people of Jurong being counted as well. So there is some merit in there actually being parties and contesting whether they win or not. Thank you for your time, and sorry for running over. Let me stop here now.
Thank you.
Prof. Goh, we can't hear you.
Prof. Koh, you're muted.
Hi, Prof. Goh, you're on mute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Gillian, for a very substantive presentation, full of nuggets. We'll come back to you later. Let me quickly introduce our second speaker. The second speaker, Viswas Sadasivan, is a very old friend, someone whom I've admired in his frequent reincarnations. He began life as a journalist and did very well on television. He then decided to go into the private sector, and he started a company called The Right Angle, which for 10 years, I think he ran very successfully. And he's now the founder and CEO of another company called Strategic Move. But he's also contributed to the public sector in various ways, including serving at the NMP. And I remember his 2 years at NMP were very good years. He made a mark. More recently, he started something which I follow from time to time. I found it very interesting. It's a, what do you call it, a video on the internet in which he invites a guest and asks them challenging questions. The program is called Inconvenient Question. So Vishwa is a man for all seasons. I was very envious last year when President Obama visited Singapore at the invitation of the Bank of Singapore, and the bank invited Vishwa to conduct a dialogue with President Obama, and he did very well. So over to you, Vishwa.
Thank you, Prof. The date was 25th May 1961. I was 2 years old, and Prof, you probably remember this. Bukit Ho Swee fire. The whole of Bukit Ho Swee, which was a squatter population, went ablaze. I was living nearby in Kampong Baru. We could see the fire and the smoke, and there was tremendous panic. And Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, was our member of parliament. And he came out there, and we as kids, we ran down to Bukit Ho Swee. We saw the fire. And what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, as the Prime Minister, said was that in 1 year, in 12 months, I will make sure that each one of you gets a new home with new fittings, with electricity, and a flushing toilet. He said that. This was in May of 1961. All of them got their flats, HDB flats. And mind you, this is just 1 year after HDB was formed in 1960. All of them were housed within 9 months in February the following year. It was incredible. And the chairman of HDB then was Lim Kim San, who later became cabinet minister for 22 years. And that gave way to the creation of what is known as the social contract between the government and the people of Singapore. The social contract basically means that in return for full trust in us, the government, we will make sure that all your needs, not necessarily wants, but all your needs will be taken care of. And that was that has been a very, very important part of the way Singapore has been governed. The PAP has been able to maintain that social contract for decades. It's not just about winning election. It's about delivering on promise. And I don't think any other government in the world has been able to deliver the way the Singapore PAP ruling party has been able to deliver as government. Continuously and consistently, right? Now, as a result of the continuous and consistent delivery of promise, the people continued to deliver on the trust, right? And they also gave the PAP ruling party tremendous latitude in being tough, even in being rough. Latitude was given because they delivered.
Oh,
now, then we came to 2011, right? The 2011 election was really a landslide election, was really a watershed election in a certain way, because the kinds of issues that they were facing at that time, right? Foreign talent, foreigners coming in, large numbers in Singapore, the infrastructure not being able to accommodate, therefore Singaporeans feeling overcrowded, being squeezed out, Singaporeans feeling the jobs were being taken, and the price of HDB flats going up. And many people felt that, their children could not afford a HDB flat in their lifetime. And mind you, HDB flats were seen as an entitlement. So that's the reason why in the 2011 election, they lost a lot of votes. Okay. They lost votes. Now, the difference is within a few years, they were able to correct it. The HDB issues were sorted out by then Minister for National Development, Khaw Boon Wan, the fixer minister. He fixed it by increasing the supply and bringing the price down. It's a very simple equation, right? Secondly, the issue of foreigners coming in large numbers also was managed. Now, immediately after that, when these big issues were sorted out, and there was a lot more accounting for, and then there was a Pioneer Generation package, which is a leftist policy, a socialist policy. And then there were other policies like that, like MediShield Life. I think because of all these things, plus, as Gillian said, the passing of our founding leader, Lee Kuan Yew, contributed to a landslide victory in 2015. The fundamental difference between the situation in 2011 and the situation in 2020 is this. The issues that we were grappling with in 2011 were issues that were within the control of the PAP to solve. The PAP could solve those issues because they were about changing policy, increasing the supply of HDB flats, which was within their control. But look at the issues that the government is facing today. COVID. Is it within the government's control to deal with COVID? It's not. I personally think that the government has done a good job, even though the foreign worker dorm issue was there. But as a whole, I think looking at other countries, the Singapore government has done well. But, expectations have gone up. And partly because I feel that the PAP, the ruling party, did not manage the expectations enough. So expectations soared, you could not deliver on the promise. Because people say, we are okay with you being paid a lot, we are okay with you being tough and rough, throwing POFMA at us, but I want to see you deliver. But when the equation is not the same as the Bukit Ho Swee fire situation or even 2011, when the situation was very much within the control of the PAP, today, the situation is much more different and people expect a different conduct in the election. That, to me, is a new narrative, right? So you are having a situation where you have you have jobs going, the economy is not within the control of the government because we are essentially a trade-based economy, right? Look at what's happening around the world. Look at the political economies. Look at the clash between US and China. How that's going to affect us, all of us in the rest of Asia. This is not within our control. So the social contract has started fraying seriously on the seams. Now the people feel justified to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept you being hard, tough, and rough on me. I expect humility, I expect magnanimity, I expect decency. Now that's the reason why I feel to a large extent Sengkang fell to the opposition. I feel that it's the Raisa Khan issue that tilted the balance. It's not so much the young people. No, it's a sensibility, Singaporean sensibility. I do feel that it's not just the young people who voted for the PAP, voted for the opposition this time, Workers' Party in particular. I think it was a significant percentage of people in the middle, I would say in the middle class, people in their 40s, people in their 50s, because of the social contract issue. The ruling party doesn't have the same clout and the authority that they used to have today, as they, and therefore they cannot have strong arm tactics. So during the hustings, when POFMA was issued a couple of times, on one occasion, on a forum that I chaired, so I know how it feels when you're POFMA. Even though you don't need to take down the video, the fact that you are POFMA, for what? For not, I don't think we did anything particularly wrong, and you've no recourse. So when these things happen, and then the strong arm tactics when it came to the Raisa Khan issue, she's a young lady. Yes, she should have been a lot more judicious in the use of language and so on. Yes, but at the end of the day, this is a young lady prepared to devote her life to serving the people. This is not the way you treat a young person. So that sensibility, it cut across language, race, and religion. As a Singaporean, I felt proud that Singaporeans were able to look beyond her race and her religion and her gender. And the statesman-like conduct by Pritam Singh in the night press conference further tilted the balance. If you look at it, that was a great use of media and social media. He stood in front of her physically, like he was protecting her. He stood in front of her and he was completely informal and authentic in the way he presented his views. And then when he made sure that the journalist got the broad message, he stepped back and made her step forward, Raisa Khan, and speak for herself. That was leadership. And Singaporeans have come far enough to recognize leadership when it stares you in your face. So you see what I mean? I don't think it was tactics per se. I think tactics aside, I mean, generally I agree that it was the opposition teams that did much better in social media and internet, much better, mainly because they didn't have the benefit of mainstream media working on their side. So necessity is the mother of invention, I guess. So it really worked very well in their benefit. And they knew how to use it. Workers' Party, in my view, did it the best because they focused on being authentic. The videos that they had done on James and on Raisa and many of the new faces was so delightful to watch because they caught them as human beings, not as two-dimensional individuals. But the mistake, I believe, that the PAP did was to orchestrate. Anything that is well orchestrated should not seem like it's orchestrated. A good strategy, the moment it appears like a strategy, is not a good strategy. So when you see almost all the new faces of the PAP coming out one by one to say how they suffered in life and came up, it was scripted. It felt scripted. That didn't work because Singaporeans were looking for authenticity. Singaporeans were looking not at cardboard figures, but at human beings who could exhibit their vulnerability, like Raisa Khan did, like Pritam Singh did. You know what I'm saying? That mattered a lot. When James did his interview, the video, he talked about how much his father meant to him. You see what I mean? Singaporeans want to see that human being, that frailty. And Workers' Party did it brilliantly. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this election is a watershed. It is a watershed because the population has matured. Not because of tactics. The population has matured. The social contract has weakened. Not because the PAP is inept. No, because the situation is a lot more complex. It's way beyond their control. So if the PAP now starts demonstrating the capacity and the interest and the desire to actively listen, like I'm seeing this in Parliament in the past few days, right? I think they are demonstrating the willingness to listen, to hear people out. If they continue with this, I think the PAP will start regaining some ground in 2025. But if the PAP goes back to strong arm tactics, when the social contract has been weakened, I suspect that what's going to happen in 2025 is that the Workers' Party specifically, as well as PSP and other parties, will cover the vacuum. And they will be able to take the 1/3. This is my prediction. But the ball is very much in the ruling part, in the PAP's court, because the PAP needs to show magnanimity, sincerity, authenticity, not just technical ability. And if they can do it, they will win back the votes that they appear to have lost in 2020. But if they fail to do it, not only will they lose the 1/3 of the seats in parliament, which means that the supermajority will be lost. I suspect in 2030, Singapore might very well see the first non-PAP prime minister in a coalition government. And I'd like to end by saying that is not a scenario that I would like to see. I think a coalition government weakens government. I would like to see, if it's possible, I would like to see a more accountable ruling party, a single ruling party, more accountable, more magnanimous, more confident, and more human. Thank you.
Thank you, Viswa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can't hear you anymore.
Now we can't hear you.
I think there's a connection issue.
This is the first time
Prof.
Prof Ko's internet connectivity is so bad. He has had a few meetings with students. I suggest in view of time, maybe can we invite Walid to continue? But thank you very much, Wispa, for your very honest and authentic sharing.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thanks to everyone at Tembusu for inviting me. Prof Ko is not on. I wanted to thank him, but okay, it's okay. I can do that later. So today there will be three main things that I will be talking about. Hold on, let me just get the slide. So is the slide okay for everyone? Yeah, so I will be talking about the 4G leaders, what happens to them now. Secondly, race in politics, right? Especially with specific reference to the GRCs. And third would be politics for the future. What happens now for Singapore politics and for Singaporeans and for the ruling party especially. Okay, so just some numbers. I know Jillian showed us some numbers, but the specifics of the 4G, 3G dynamics, I wanted to elaborate more on. So the average PAP vote share for, on the left column is for the 3G leaders. Now, I know Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan identified himself as the 4G leader, but I think most people see him as the 3G leader. And I think for purposes of analysis, it makes more sense to view him as a 3G leader than a 4G leader because he's been around for a long time. And there is a point behind this as well that I will say. So the average vote share was 66.4%, whereas the average PAP vote share for the 4G leaders, the GRCs that were led by the 4G leaders, was actually 59.56%. Now, there are a few caveats because there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? There are a few caveats. Firstly, these results are partly a function of the strength of the opposition parties against the PAP. So the Workers' Party didn't contest in any of the GRCs led by the 3G leaders. Right? So once you take the WP out and you take Tan Cheng Bock out, then the average vote share for the 4G leaders would be 65%. However, there is a caveat to that caveat as well. The opposition parties which they choose to contest in constituencies that they are more likely to win. So the fact that they do not contest against the 4G leaders, 3G leaders, already tells you where their minds are at with regards to assessing the 4G and the 3G leaders. Now, and also just anecdotally, and I've spoken to so many people, I think we cannot sugarcoat it. There is definitely a perception issue with the 4G from the electorate. Definitely the 3G and the 2G and the first generation is trusted more. There is more faith in the ability of the 3G or previous generations to execute policies for Singapore. Now, whether that's fair is a different matter because ultimately it's 3G that's in charge. But there is that perception. And this perception this is not exactly new in Singapore politics. This is a table of the vote and seat share of the PAP from 1968 to 2015. Now, the ones in purple are the elections under Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew as Prime Minister, as the leader of the PAP. The ones in red for Goh Chok Tong, and the ones in green for Lee Hsien Loong. And you can see for every time there is a transition, the new Prime Minister in his first election, he will suffer a dip. So in 1991, there was a dip, although to be fair to him, the PAP's vote share was already on the decline. And in 2006, there was also a dip, a significant dip. And of course, because 2001, the flight to safety mindset that Jillian talked about already. So you see that there was always an issue with a new Prime Minister taking over. Now, this election is not the first time under Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat, but it's almost as if it is the first test for the 4G, because they were the ones that were tasked to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent economic fallout. So you can see that there are issues with the 4G leadership, at least as reflected in the vote share. So what do the 4G need to do? Well, essentially they need to reconnect with the ground. And Professor Yaakob Ibrahim, he actually said that the 4G does not have a brand, basically, right? Under PM Goh Chok Tong, the first time he had the consultative government, and he had the Swiss standard of living, and we do not see that kind of branding from the 4G. I'm paraphrasing him, of course, and I tend to agree with him. I think that's one, that the 4G need to do that, and they definitely need to reconnect with the ground in terms of just giving or exuding more confidence in terms of their policy making. And during the pandemic especially, there was a perception that a lot of policies were changing so fast. It's almost as if there was a sense that, did they really know what they were doing? This was what many or some Singaporeans were asking. Right? And of course, the strategies that were employed by the PAP, which I will get to later on. Okay, so definitely the first point I want to say is there's a lot of work for the 4G leadership to do, and there's no way getting around this. Now, secondly, what does the election tell us about race in politics? Okay? So again, of the GRCs, there were many that were actually led by minorities. So Jurong, of course, and then you had Nisun by Minister Shanmugam, Holland Bukit Timah. You had Tampines led by Minister Masagos, and West Coast by Iswaran. And Aljunied GRC was led by Pritam Singh. But not only that, you had three minorities in the Aljunied team. You had Leon Pereira, Faisal Manap, and Pritam Singh, and they won resoundingly. Right. Other points, Murali Pillai won against a Chinese Chis Punjuan in an SMC. And the WP's Marine Parade team actually had two Malay candidates. For the first time in history, there were two Malay candidates. What are the lessons that we can take from this? I really think we need to rethink our race-based electoral institutions. So the GRC, I personally am a fan of the GRC. I think that the GRC is still relevant. But with this data, we need to at least rethink and re-question the purpose of the GRC. Now, the GRC always had flaws, which is there would be a riding on the coattails effect. Can you imagine if Ivan Lim wasn't dropped, in spite of the public outcry against him, he would be an MP now. No doubt about it, because he was running. He was supposed to run with SM Taman, and there's no way SM Taman would lose. So the GRCs always had a problem with riding on the coattails of the minister. However, the GRC, the strength of the GRC was it guaranteed minority representation. There was a guarantee of minority representation. So it seemed that that made up for the weaknesses of the GRCs. However, it seems that now the minorities are leading the GRCs. So other candidates are riding on their coattails, not the other way around. So we have to question whether the GRC is still relevant. And I think a middle ground, or one way for us to really improve the GRC, is to substantially reduce it and only have 2% GRCs. 2% GRCs, and then you'll have maybe around, depending, let's say there are 100 parliamentary seats in the next parliament, for instance. You have about 15 GRCs for reserved for Malays, 8 GRCs reserved for Indians or others, 8 to 10, and then the rest you can have SMCs. And you'll see a more competitive electoral arena. Now, it's not that you have a competitive electoral arena for the sake of it, but when you have a competitive electoral arena where candidates cannot ride on the coattails of others, you have better quality candidates coming to the fore, and even the existing candidates would have to step up their game. So I think the GRC needs to be, we need to rethink the idea of the GRC, the relevance of it, and at the very least, we need to reform the institution. Second is the very controversial elected presidency, the constitutional amendment that was made to allow for the reserved presidency. That was unpopular to begin with. It was controversial, and I think we should really question whether there is a need for such an institution. At least the GRC, a lot of people can see that there is a need, because there is a need for minority representation. Minority president, while violating the principle of meritocracy, I'm not so sure whether the benefits outweigh the cost. And the third, the non-Chinese prime minister, and just based on the results, and this is not one result, consistently over the years, SM Tharman is extremely popular. So it seems like everybody in Singapore is ready for a non-Chinese prime minister except the PAP. So that's something that we need to think about. So this particular 3 electoral approaches / institutions that we need to think about, and I'll be happy to take more questions on race in politics. Now, finally, politics for the future, right? The other speakers already talked about 2011, and the difference between 2011 and 2020 for me is 2011 was a rejection of PAP policies on housing, immigration, transport, which were, to be fair to the PAP, they were sort of rectified. And 2020 was a rejection of PAP politics. And I am convinced that Sengkang would not have fallen to the Workers' Party if the PAP had not taken such an approach, such a strong approach against Raisa Khan. And it wasn't just Raisa Khan, it was a lot of things happening, right? The POFMA being invoked, first of all, for the 10 million, but later on, POFMA was invoked against Professor Paul Tambia, and a lot of people were thinking, he didn't even say that it wasn't, the decision wasn't made in consultation with experts. It seems like a stretch that POFMA was used against him. So this unfairness clearly got to the voters, especially the middle ground voters, where you see, I mean, this is, and don't forget, how did the election campaign kick off? It was with Dr. Tan Wu Meng's article against Pritam Singh, basically blaming Pritam Singh for standing up for Alfian Saad's right to speak in Parliament, right? So it's event after event after event, which seem to show that, okay, these unfair tactics, they are getting too much, right? So, and I think based on what we have heard so far from the PAP leaders, even before polling day, the PAP sense this. They sense that their politics has been rejected by the people, especially the young people. But I agree with Viswa, not just the young people, especially minorities of all ages. It was, I think, a lot of people were uncomfortable with what happened. So the PAP senses this, and that's why Minister Shanmugam said that some soul searching needed to be done. The next one is the consultative government, right? And this soul searching, and we need to do. We have been here before. We have been here before, but it seems that a lot of times we revert back to status quo. So I wouldn't dare make predictions about the future just based on the what we have so far, right? But I would say the signs are positive, right? I hope the PAP doesn't learn the wrong lessons from the elections. I hope the PAP don't think that, oh, they lost because they had bad PR or they did bad videos, right? Yeah, that may have been a contributing factor, but that definitely wasn't the main factor. And I think they need to be honest and An honest soul searching would require that they go further than, oh, we had bad PR and the WP did good videos. Right? And just to emphasize that point, where I live in Tampines, right? The NSP didn't have any posters on my street. They only did it on the main roads. Never came. I never saw them once. The NSP got over 30+% of the votes. I can guarantee that those who voted for the NSP didn't vote for the NSP. They voted against the PAP. If you cannot get 70% against the NSP, that NSP team, right? And there is a serious problem. And definitely. So I hope the right lessons are learned from GE2020. And finally, I think we need to think of checks and balances outside political parties. Yes, it's good that we have the leader of the opposition, but ultimately, even the opposition parties, they have their own party whip, they have their own party norms, and they have their own OB markers. So we must, and ultimately they are politicians. So we must learn to have checks and balances outside the political parties, whether it's the NMPs, the academics, the media, and every single voter. Everyone should be involved. Talk to your MP, write letters. Even if you think there's, so what, it will do nothing. Well, it's better than not doing anything at all. It may at least move matters, right? So we must always stay involved. And I'll just end with this quote by Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without demand. It never did and never will. Right? And obviously the electorate has shown that there is a demand to check power, and the message has been sent, and I would say the message has been duly received. So thank you. I'll be more than happy to take any questions later on.
Thank you, Walid. Thank you as well, Gillian, Viswa. Okay, so there are already questions rolling in as you were speaking. I would like to sort of touch on the one that is highest on the list. Basically, it's talking about instruments of the state and how these are used. So there are two related questions. One is the use of POFMA, which I think Viswa and Walid, you have touched on, and how the use of POFMA actually has perhaps turned the electorate away, right, from the incumbent. But the other question is the use of police reports as a political weapon during GE 2020. Do you have any thoughts on these? And Gillian, you're welcome to chime in, particularly also on the point on POFMA, the use of POFMA.
Okay. So I think, well, anybody can make a police report, right? So it's not that big of a deal. So two things. One is, I don't like it for that this is the way that we are going, and then people make police reports and other people make police reports. It just shows that we do not have a culture of disagreement or agreeing to disagree. And that is a broader point that we need to work on. And we should not think that the way to do about things is to run to the state every time we have a disagreement. That's the first thing. Second of all, the issue wasn't the police report per se. It was that the PAP statement doubled down on the police report afterwards on Raisa. So it wasn't just a random dude making the police report. Any Singaporean can make a police report. It was that the PAP chose to use that as a conscious strategy. I understand that's not what the questioner is asking, but in response to the questioner, the first part of what I said would suffice. The second part is just something I think that we need to acknowledge, that it's not about that, it's about the party explicitly taking that stance, and that stance I think has been rejected by people.
Right, thank you.
Well, for me, I agree with Walid. I think it made a mockery of the police and police reporting, the whole process. And the more the government or the ruling party uses or starts to use these as weapons, whether it's an election or any other setting, I think you will get a pushback. And people, in the end, these important institutions like the police force will actually lose credibility over time. So do we want to take that risk? Because you're talking really about an emboldened, what is very clearly an emboldened ground. It's not just empowered, it's an emboldened ground. When it's an emboldened ground, the ground has already started feeling sure about throwing stones. Because now when they throw the stone, the PAP actually starts saying, ouch, I feel it, I feel the pain. That's how the ground is reacting, you see. So these kind of tactics, these kind, police reporting and things like that, they are not going to work. In fact, they're going to backfire on whoever uses it, as a first salvo. Going to POFMA, let's talk about Paul Tambaya, from SDP, the chairman of SDP. He was on a forum that I was hosting, I was chairing. It was an NUSS forum, pre-GE forum. And he raised the issue of, he said, he's one of the most qualified individual specialists in this particular area of COVID, right? And I asked him whether he was actually engaged, he was actually consulted. And his response was that he wasn't, he was, but then not sufficiently. And then we went on to say that they were quite surprised that the employers of foreign workers, the employers who took the foreign workers for testing, were told by the government, Ministry of Manpower specifically, that they should not do it, and that there was also a threat of them losing their license should they do it. This was, I paraphrase, of course, and this is what he said. Now, I asked him to clarify. I asked him whether he was absolutely sure that this is what happened. He said, yes, this is what happened. And I have no reason to believe that he was fabricating it or he was lying. Next thing you know, a couple of days later, we got, the following day, we got a call that from the Ministry of Manpower, that from the POFMA office, that we had to put a corrective post next to the video to say that this was falsehood. Now, we had no way of defending ourselves. Paul had no way of defending himself that it wasn't falsehood per se. It was a different way of interpreting it, but it wasn't falsehood, but there was no recourse, you know what I'm saying? But we were not told to take it down. So I had a discussion with my colleagues in NUSS and I said, look, we don't have a choice. We have to put this. But it did appear to me somewhat ridiculous because it wasn't falsehood. It wasn't proof that there was no proof that it was falsehood. There was no intent of presenting falsehood, but we still had to admit that this was falsehood. So it left a bitter taste in my mouth, and it did come across like bullying. And that doesn't make you feel good, and there was no intention on my part, on Paul's part, to actually misabuse the power we had to articulate. So you see what I mean? I think I'm not against POFMA. I think there is a place for POFMA, but if you don't use it judiciously, just as police reports, there's a place for police reports, it's important. But if you misabuse that, then you're going to bring down important institutions, the credibility of the law and order, the credibility of the legal process, due process, all of these things are going to come down. So I think the party in power and Parliament has to think carefully about putting checks and balances on the use of these things.
Okay. Gillian, do you have any points to add on the use of the state instruments, police report and POFMA? If not, I have two questions on DPM Heng's performance, which you can start by answering too.
Well, I think the police reports are where people use that system. It wasn't the police using it. Yeah. So it's everybody has the right to, if they feel that they have been affronted by something and by a comment. But to grow a more deliberative democracy, I think we want to refrain from doing that. And therefore, the point is to try and convince our friends, our colleagues, our community that in the first instance, don't go that route. Yeah. So I think that's the first point. Yeah. Unless you are suggesting that somebody, somebody within the government actually used that instrument. On POFMA, I think that we've seen the exchange, and with the government minister who was in charge of the response to COVID, Lawrence Wong, stating that the issues that were at hand were, first, that the government had not issued the advisory that had been suggested it had issued. So therefore, that on a point of fact, it did not issue the sort of advisory it was alleged to have done. Then the second one was the allegation that no medical people were in charge in directing the position. And so the minister said that's quite baseless. So I think POFMA, has to be used very carefully, but you will see that it's been written to address statements of fact which turn out not to be fact. And I think for our democracy, if we want it to grow and be strengthened, then we do not want it to be polluted or distorted in as far as possible by non-facts. And we've seen how that plays out elsewhere. So I think just as a development in the future, I think where we do public discourse and comments and even GE and all that, we want as far as possible to be fact-based. And my final point about this is that when the government actually calls out a non-fact or baseless allegation, it is itself obliged to share what those facts are. And when it doesn't do that, then again, it will subject itself to questioning about the credibility of that legislation. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and we do want the system in place for our democracy. It does mean that when the government calls it out, there's no tear down. If we are better informed then of what the facts are, I think we can proceed to have a far more fact-based and informed discussion, which was one of my key points about the future in my presentation. Now, quickly on the point about Jurong GRC, I think that the question is whether Mr. Heng Swee Keat's political standing has been damaged by the performance there. I can only say this, that first, the 2020 East Coast GRC comprises East Coast GRC of 2015 and Fengshan of 2015, where if you average out the score, they secured in 2015 59.1%. If you joined it back together again, which is what happened in 2020. So if that's the case, then you take away the average swing from the PAP in 2020 of 8.7, then you shave off 8.7 from 59.1, they would have, if nothing else changes, 50.4. Now we know that the actual share of vote polled in East Coast GRC in 2020 was 53.4. So in a way, some people have said DPM Heng did not perform well if he is meant to be the next PM. And other people have said, well, DPM Heng saved East Coast GRC from WP. And so that is the kind of interpretation of, those are the two possible interpretations of what happened. Now the key question, then one question from Ruben Wong was, why is East Coast GRC so competitive? East Coast GRC, our unit, and also Marine Parade are places where you have a higher proportion of higher SES, people in the higher socioeconomic class, older populations based there, far more private housing. And those are precisely the segments that look upon political pluralism far more positively. So even if they feel the PAP is doing well, they feel that for the PAP to continue to do well, you do require checks and balances, and you want diversity of voices in Parliament. So that is fertile ground for the opposition movement, and clearly the WP has done well. If we recall, 13th Parliament, the NCMPs, the spots usually given to the best losers, one of whom should have been Lily Ann. She conceded her spot and she gave it to Leon Pereira and Daniel Goh from East Coast GRC. And Dennis Tan got a spot from Fengshan. So it's those spots which were already very weak for the PAP. And therefore, final moment of surprise. Remember, it's not a surprise for Tampines that Heng Swee Keat moved out. The nomination papers are all properly typewritten. But I think there was just a little bit of surprise and drama in East Coast, where it was handwritten that Heng Swee Keat was going there. So I think that was really actually the strategy of the PAP. And it was, I think for the PAP, Heng Swee Keat saved East Coast GRC.
So,
Can I
yes,
weigh in on this? Yeah. So, as someone who's lived in East Coast for most of his life, I think there is no way getting around it. The result was not good for the future Prime Minister of Singapore. Essentially, what happened is this: the PAP said, East Coast, we are going to put leadership succession of Singapore and PAP in your hands, and 47% of East Coast residents said no thank you. That's essentially what happened, right? So yes, there is that element where DPM Heng definitely, I think a lot of, especially given the budget, and a lot of people associate DPM Heng with the budget, he definitely brought a lot of voters over, but also it's not a good look for him, definitely. And I think the PAP also need to reckon with that, and then they can move on. And we must not forget also, he has the job of a politician is not just to make policies, right? Even senior bureaucrats make policies, right? It's also about selling policies. It's also about delivering speeches. It's about inspiring confidence in the party. And I would say during the hustings, DPM Heng probably didn't do that well enough. And that's something that needs to be worked on as well, on his part and on the PAP's part.
And we remember that he was at the center of the 10 million population controversy. It was alleged that he agreed to or supported that. But if we read the transcripts, just in plain language, whatever it says, he did not support that. In fact, he countered himself and said, some people say that that's possible, but when we look at the social implications, we really do have to reconsider that, even that mild prospect of it. So he was at the center of that. And then he was also at the center of the controversy about the non-Chinese PM, whether it is possible for Singapore to have a non-Chinese PM. And again, there was a police report. Remember that? A police report against him for being racist, when what he said was that there are certain segments that are not prepared for that. So he wasn't saying he is racist, but he was saying that other people have that as a stumbling block.
Well, actually, I know
So
something
I
about,
guess he
about
was
that.
in the hot seat through that. And as I said just now, going into the thing, it was already a very tight margin to begin with. Yeah. So while it is right that it was a tough place to go to.
Well, I just want to chime in on this. I tend to feel that I'm also from the East Coast, GRC, and I've been living here for a long time. I think the general sense now, after the dust has settled, is more positive towards Heng Swee Keat, DPM Heng Swee Keat. People are appreciating him because he comes across as a good person. The human side of him is coming across a lot better. Like today or yesterday when he spoke in Parliament, he paid tribute to the outgoing MPs. He made special mention of opposition leader Lau Tia Kiang, and he came across very sincere in acknowledging his contribution. See, so I think this situation, this kind of difficult situation, is actually forcing the character and the personality of Heng Swee Keat to come out more. This is my sense. And otherwise, he is seen as a person who's making speeches without allowing his own vulnerability to surface. But I'm beginning to see that people are seeing the human side of this man.
Yes, but
And
we know
usually,
that, yeah, we know
and
that
usually,
he
and it's usually in difficult situations that the best as well as the worst comes out. In DPM Heng Swee Keat's case, I think the best is coming out. That's my take on it.
But one wonders why the PAP hadn't actually sent Mr. Heng Swee Keat out there much earlier, because it was clear that the anchor minister, Mr. Lim Swee Say, was already standing down. He stood down from a mainstream ministry position, and that he had already stated 2 elections prior that he would like to retire from politics. So one wonders why Mr. Heng Swee Keat could not have been sent to the ground much earlier, in the middle of last year, for instance.
Yeah.
What is the whole thing about a surprise element? Therefore, I think there's a little bit of tactical and strategy that needs some refining. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond because on the DPM Heng and non-Chinese Prime Minister, I know a little bit about that because I was the one who asked DPM Heng that question, and his answer was in response to me, and he actually said the older generation was not ready, and that was the reason why the PAP did not. So that is a reason why the PAP did not. So whatever the reason, the decision is made by the PAP, not the older generation, because the prime ministerial choice is not an election. It's a PAP that decides. And my question was actually, is it Singapore who's not ready for a non-Chinese prime minister, or is it the PAP who's not ready for a non-Chinese prime minister?
2 points, Walid. So why did that deserve a police report?
No, it doesn't deserve a police report. It doesn't deserve a police report.
Right. I
Yeah,
mean,
that
but
was
it
a
happened the same way that Raisha Khan drew a police report. That's the first point. The second point is, indeed, we have to be very clear. IPS did do the survey, and the questions were posed. So the responses are indeed suggest that the segments that are more prepared to be more multiracial and more multicultural in outlook and choice of political leaders are 2 segments. First, the younger generation, and second, the people who, through the survey, have suggested that they have had far more interaction with people of different races. I guess the impolite finding is indeed that the senior segments of the population are not prepared for the change.
I don't dispute that observation by DPM Heng, but 2 things. One is there's a difference between a generic minority and SM Taman.
But he was not incorrect.
Right.
Said.
I didn't say he was incorrect. Yeah. I didn't say he was incorrect. Secondly, is the PAP decision, right? The PAP prides itself on a party that does the right thing, not the popular thing. If you could change the constitution to have a Malay president, to have the SM Taman, who, I mean, let's face it, is widely popular. Probably you yourself said that, Dr. Jillian, you said that he's the most popular politician in Singapore.
No, Michelle Lee
right? Okay, Michelle Lee said that he's the most popular politician in Singapore, and I don't think many people would disagree. So again, this is where I think we need to have a fundamental rethinking about how we approach race.
Yes, but I think that we will also, it's not to excuse, but to explain. I think that if we understand the PAP's framework or philosophy of leadership succession, then you will understand why DPM or former DPM Tharman is not has not been discussed as a successor to the PM. It has to do with transitions between cohorts, not within cohorts.
But that wasn't the answer. Okay, I'll just leave it. But that wasn't the reason that was given by the PAP.
No.
The reason was.
Yeah, the reason was
he's not Chinese.
Right. And
he's
does that
so
deserve a police report that Heng Swee Keat is racist? Yeah.
I just want. Maybe we should move on. I know. Maybe we should move on. But maybe Jillian, maybe we should move on. But the point about the police report is precisely that it has become a mockery. It's made a mockery of it. So obviously, I mean, Jillian, for goodness sakes, everyone knows that the police report on DPM Heng was a rebuttal. So it was a mockery. And I completely agree with you. It was nonsensical. But
that's right.
So we agree. We agree.
Yeah.
Yes. Over to you, Margaret. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think one of the questions, I mean, since we are talking about issues of race, and this is something that you can't get away from in Singapore, is if we look at the performance of Workers' Party, for example, one of the questioner asked, is there a risk of WP alienating the traditional Chinese grassroots support in the East, right? Because based on who you send to debate or not send to debate. And a related question too, it's also whether the issues are framed in a particular way that also creates sort of a generational gap, and how that might impact the political parties. Because based on the way they frame the debate, right, they're almost speaking a different language, right, to different groups of people. Are they losing particular groups, particular racial profile of the electorate, and particular generation?
You know, if I could just quickly respond to that, I think the politics going forward and the assignment of candidates to GRCs or constituencies needs to be very, very carefully calibrated, because the ground is actually shifting, and each GRC, each constituency is beginning to demonstrate a very distinct and discernible character or characteristics. Take Sengkang, for example. I thought the Workers' Party choice of candidates was spot on in terms of age demographics, in terms of personality, if you look at it, right? Because it's if you go to Sengkang, you actually, because I have quite a few friends in Sengkang area. If you go there, you can actually sense that it's an area where you have English educated young couples with young children. You know what I'm saying? So this is a particular characteristic of that place. Now, so you got to send people that this particular demographic will respond to, right? And if you look at the four of them who were sent there by Workers' Party, I think the ground in Sengkang responded very favorably to them because of the personality alignment. Now, so if you compare that with the PAP team that was sent there, right, it didn't quite gel with that demographics and the personality alignment that comes with it. So I think going forward, important lesson here is the various constituencies are beginning to, and the GRCs are beginning to develop a character of its own, you know, and in deploying people, you have to think carefully about the personality. If you take East Coast, for example, right, some of the Workers' Party candidates who are in East Coast actually fit in with the East Coast culture very well. If you ask me, I can tell you what the East Coast culture is because I've lived that, you know what I'm saying? So I think that is, for me, very, very interesting. The Sengkang case study, where it was not just the tactics, it was not just Reza Khan. Reza Khan was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. But it is also the selection of candidates was brilliantly done by Workers' Party in sending them to Sengkang.
Gillian, do you have anything to add?
Which particular point, Margaret?
Whether, for example, the kind of, Biswa talk about the selection of candidates, right, that is targeted for the particular GRC. Do you think there's a risk there of them alienating certain demographics, for example, the more traditional Chinese grassroots support that they used to get?
Well, I think when you look at Sengkang GRC, there were already two constituent wards, and of course, I think we all know Punggol East. At least two constituent wards that were quite weak. And therefore, it's a question of just tipping over in terms of a strategy. And I think that in the selection, I think they needed a sort of a selection to just allow for that tipping over. As I've written in an op-ed, it's not just about the tipping over because of a demographic profile, but these politicians actually said that they understood the ground and they spoke like insiders. So it is actually not to alienate, but it was absolutely to identify with the people there. On the broader question that you posed, Margaret, to begin with, in terms of how the WP managed its the general communication strategy, I think with the standing down of Lau Tia Kiang, there was a worry that the WP would not keep the faith with its older segment and with the Chinese-speaking segment. And when they did not field someone to the Chinese debate, they got the feedback and they recovered very, very quickly, so that they actually did have somebody in the next Mandarin dialogue and after that. It was very good. They were very good. And finally, of course, they did feature Lau Tia Kiang in terms of electioneering. He was featured and he did stump for his old party, of course. And he was very clear about associating himself with the younger generation. So I think that they may have taken that segment a little bit for granted to begin with, but they recovered brilliantly and sort of plugged that gap quite quickly. Margaret, back to you.
Thank you. This is a question that will probably be quite close to a lot of our students' heart. It is about the lowering of the voting age in Singapore. Should the voting age be lowered? First of all, what do you think of that? And then should it be lowered? What changes should be made to accompany this? Walid, would you like to start first?
Yes, I am a fan of expanding this. I wouldn't say my stance on this is unequivocal, but I would say it has worked in other countries. You know, Malaysia is doing it as well. And the contradiction is, if you are in the police during the NS, or even if you're in the army, right, you hold a gun and you are trained to make a decision, a life and death decision, about when you can shoot somebody or not. And at 18, you're already allowed to make that decision. Are we saying that that same person does not have the faculties to make the decision about voting? Then there seems to be a contradiction somewhere, right? Now, would there be a problem with lowering the voting age? Of course, there would be, right? The flip side to that is maybe people are not mature enough, and therefore they may not make the right decision. So I think the questioner is right on in saying that other things need to accompany that. And I would say we need a lot of things, right? We need a more open media, for instance, right? We need a freer, a more open. I know it's been improving, but we need even more of that. We need more space for contestation of ideas and in the broader political spectrum, and not where a person, the broader political arena, not where a person feels like he or she cannot say something and will be shut down, or there's the threat of POFMA. We need all of that for a person to come. And I think a politically savvy electorate can be developed if all of these things are done from a very young age. I mean, if you're exposed to a lot of these things at a young age, hopefully, right? Yeah, so that is what I would say.
Tonight's forum is one example.
Yeah, my sense is quite similar to what Walid said. I don't have a very strong view on this, but I would say my response is why not? Why not consider it? Because people are maturing a lot faster than they were during my time compared to my time. You know, we have access. Young people today have access to a lot of information, knowledge. They may not be sharing it, but they're absorbing a lot of information. They are a lot more aware than we give them credit for. So I would say, why don't we have a discussion, a serious discussion, policy discussion about this, you know, in Parliament, and before we make a decision as to whether you want to lower it or not, let there be a good, mature discussion. And a quick point about Workers' Party, the earlier question that you had. I just want to remind all of us that for the longest time, the leader of the Workers' Party was an Indian, Indian by the name of J.B. Jeyaretnam. And a lot of the people who were there supporting J.B. Jeyaretnam were Chinese. So again, you know, I think we are so used to looking at, to actually racializing virtually everything that we see. Who says that the Workers' Party is a Chinese party? Lau Tia Kiang would tell you it's not a Chinese party. A lot of the supporters of Workers' Party are non-Chinese, but you have Chinese as well, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that let's not look at everything along racial lines. Let's not forget that the J.B. Jeyaretnam was a founder, was the leader of Workers' Party for the longest time. Lau Tia Kiang took over, and he led it very well. And then the time has come to pass on the mantle to another person, and a pretty good leader, I must say.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Gillian?
On the point of WP, back to what Biswa was saying, I think as a great comms expert as he, if you want to build a national movement, then you should be able to straddle all those segments. I think that's the key point.
Absolutely.
And then on the voting age question, and I've written about this, I think, yeah, it's a very interesting point to discuss and debate because there is a trend. And I think that what will tip the balance is an argument about what difference that makes to lower the voting age from 21 to, let's just say for argument's sake, 18. What Walid said about putting a gun in the hands of 18-year-olds and they can decide whether to shoot it or not. I'll leave it to the gentleman here who've done NS to tell me if they have full liberty to do that or not. Because that analogy has been made several times, and I'm not sure that that is really true.
Yes, if you're in the police,
point,
not about the army. I was talking about the police because I was in the police. Yeah.
And you are at full liberty to fire your arms if you are walking the streets as a policeman.
If you are given the liberty to make a decision based on the conditions that allow the firearm to be used, and your decision is no different from a 40-year-old's decision.
I think we need to sort of
I think
round up the forum.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
will give each of you 3 minutes to, first of all, maybe answer the very first question that Prof. Koh posed, whether do you consider this a watershed election? I mean, based on, you know, we have had these points raised in other elections before. If it is, then what makes it a watershed election? And any other last point you'd like to add? So just 3 minutes each, please. Gillian, I'll start with you.
It is a watershed election because we now have a new level of opposition in Parliament, duly elected. Remember the debate about whether you have NCMPs and that's good enough. And the PAP government's gone on to seal the deal to make it very much a part of the new political structure post 2020 by introducing the role of the leader of the opposition. And we've seen how that's now played out in the last 2 days. So it is a watershed election, and it is also something that has changed the structure of political power in Singapore because it's been institutionalized, that there will be a position for the opposition to treat that as a serious position rather than one that the PAP will hope to do away with. And so I'll say, I'll just repeat the 3 final points that I had to rush through. I say that the future of our democracy depends on this. First, our appreciation of the Constitution and rule of law, and that should be applied equally. And so the follow-up from that has to do with our institutions, but also what we say about them, and whether politicians actually take the idea of constitutionalism seriously or much too lightly and sway political opinion, which may be a very dangerous and slippery road to go on. So that's the first point. Then the second point is I think that we do want our democracy to grow in a way that supports fact-based, informed deliberation. So there are facts, then there can be opinions built around those facts. So whatever we can do to support that would be a good thing. And the third one is finally that, yes, this is a watershed election with a higher representation of the opposition, but to the point about voting age and all that, I think there is a political life to be lived between elections. And this is where the shaping of public policy requires deliberative democracy, day in, day out. And we hope that the political parties also have a life, right, between elections, and that they contribute to the discussion as much as we hope citizens and the Tembusu community and the academic community can act in a way that enriches our democracy in between elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Viswa?
Well, thank you, Margaret. I'd like to go back to the larger point I made earlier about the social contract. It is definitely a watershed election for me, because I think there is more than a tacit acceptance and acknowledgement that the social contract is not as strong as it was, even as it was in 5 years ago, 2015. And it's going to get watered down more and more, simply not because we don't have a good government, not because we don't have a strong government, because of the realities in the world that we live in. We have less and less control. No government, no matter how good they are, will have sufficient control of what's going on to execute policies effectively and efficiently. Therefore, you've got to accept that the kind of social contract that we built a society on is not going to be what it is. Now, which means that people are not prepared to give you as much latitude in leveraging your power. What it therefore means is that you'll have to move towards a more collaborative governing style. But what do we mean by that? It needs to be more collaborative in parliament, in politics. Whether it leads to a coalition government down the road or not, I'm not sure. As I said earlier, I hope it wouldn't happen that so soon, because we have benefited from a single party in government, but a government that has sufficient checks. And I do think it's healthy for Singapore as a whole, for the supermajority to be diluted. I don't think the supermajority should continue. That's why I'm in favor of the 1/3 going to the opposition parties. But I also believe that the civil society has to shape up. And I think we are beginning to see, when the ground is emboldened, the energies have to move towards something constructive, like civil society. It shouldn't go down to, strikes and riots and things like that. It shouldn't. Or to anger, or to fighting back, or making police reports, so to speak. Those things are unproductive after some time, and Gillian, that's what I was trying to say. It's a mockery. It was ridiculous when I saw that, the police report on DPM Heng. But that's what happens when people don't have an outlet for the frustrations that they're feeling. I think we've got a very good government. I would like to see this government continue to acknowledge that they need to work together with the rest of Singapore, starting with the opposition politicians, in making Singapore a more accountable country. Thank you.
Thank you. Walid?
I would like to believe it's a watershed, but I really don't want to jinx it. So let's define the term first, right? A turning point, right? And to know whether it's a turning point, you can only look back after a few years, after a few elections, and see whether it was a turning point, a genuine turning point, or a false turning point, right? I remember after 2011, everyone was using the term new normal, right? And after 2015, it was new normal no more. So we must never assume that political development is on a linear trajectory. We must never assume that. And enough cases have shown us in Singapore, just in recent years, from 2011 to 2015, but in other countries as well. There can be backsliding, there can be authoritarian advance in other countries, there can be all sorts of things. So it's not going to be a linear, as in we cannot assume that it's going to be a linear trajectory. Does it look likely? It does. It does. But can the PAP learn and come back stronger? Of course they can. They have done so in the past, right? There's nothing stopping them from learning and coming back stronger and winning even more seats next time. Although now I would say one of the things that make it look good for the opposition, because the fear factor has sort of decreased. It hasn't disappeared completely, but it has decreased. So you would expect more credible candidates to be willing to join the opposition as well, and that can only make them stronger. But I have no doubt that the PAP will come back stronger as well. And a stronger PAP, a stronger opposition is ultimately a stronger Singapore.
Great, thank you. Thanks for ending on that very optimistic note. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do to ensure that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for such an enriching, exciting discussion. And to the attendees, again, heartfelt apologies if you're unable to answer your questions, but thank you so much also for posting very thought-provoking questions. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.